We acknowledge that Tri-Cities Community Television operates on the traditional, ancestral, and unceded territory of the Coquitlam First Nation. We thank the Coquitlam who continue to live on these lands and care for them along with the waters and all that is above and below.
Hi, it's Cathy Cena with Tri-Cities Community TV, and today you're watching Catching Up with Cathy. My guest today is Robert Simons, the president of the Port Moody Foundation. Welcome to the program, Robert. How are you doing?
I'm doing fine. Thank you for inviting me to come to your show. This wonderful opportunity to sort of speak about the Port Moody Foundation and what we do in the community and the work we do within the areas of interest that we have within Port Moody.
I can't wait to hear all about it. Tell us, tell our viewers, what is the Port Moody Foundation? There's a Coquitlam one, there's a Port Coquitlam one. Talk a little bit about the foundations as a whole throughout Canada, and then we'll get right into what Port Moody Foundation does for its community.
Thank you for the question, and it's a really good question to ask because a lot of people don't understand what a foundation is. Think about the community chest when you played Monopoly.
Right.
So the community chest was basically the place where you put some funds and you basically help build community with those funds. So the foundations are really the same type of design. And communities take the opportunity to sort of set these up so that there's an opportunity for people to leave a legacy for themselves that helps the community sort of continue to sustain the arts, the heritage, those types of programs for social betterment as well. And so within the Tri-Cities, yes, we do have three of them. So there's Port Coquitlam, Coquitlam, and Port Moody. We'll say that we were the first. Coquitlam came in second, and then Port Coquitlam after that. There's well over 190 of these organizations across the country. And each one have a very specific geographic focus, but there is collaborative work. So the Vancouver Foundation, as an example in British Columbia, does take a broader view across the province, and they build connections amongst all of the community foundations for certain programs that are associated with common work. But then within the individual communities, there's unique characteristics that exist within each community. And so for Port Moody, art, of course, as you know, is a very significant component, but also we have heritage, but we also have all the other betterment components associated with the community build, which is environment. Those types of things that basically help people that have some challenges. All of those types of things exist throughout different communities at different components. And within Port Moody, of course, we focus on the areas that are of very specific interest to our residents in Port Moody. But on occasion, we do collaborate with Coquitlam and Port Coquitlam because those funds that come from different levels of government basically cross the Tri-Cities. So when we talk about an organization like SHARE, SHARE works across the Tri-Cities. So for us to work singularly with SHARE would not be an appropriate item. So we do work with the other foundations when the opportunity presents itself to basically collaborate and support an organization like SHARE. But there's other organizations that work specifically within Port Moody, and we work very specifically with those. And I could pick out one, which would be the Port Moody Ecological Society, what they do for salmon enhancement and stream keeping.
Right. And so what would you say is the mission and the vision of the Port Moody Foundation, and how does it serve its community?
So the core mission of any foundation is to basically build community capacity. So within the community, of course, there's many organizations that do a lot of wonderful work, but all of them are going to be funded challenged. And many of them are in the nonprofit sector. So what the Community Foundation does, it builds a capital asset pool by which we can help to sustain those organizations through grants for specific projects they do, or for the program they undertake on an ongoing basis. And that's the mission of the Port Moody Foundation, is to basically build an endowment portfolio by which we can then support those organizations that do the work. We as an organization don't do the work. We leave that up to the experts that are in those fields, be it art, heritage, ecological development, and social betterment, because the social betterment is a very broad spectrum of work that has to be undertaken.
So that goes into my next question then. What are some key projects or initiatives that the foundation has supported recently?
Well, there's been 2 or 3 very significant programs that came out as a result of COVID, where the federal government and after that the provincial government provided funding to help the nonprofit sector survive through the COVID challenges. The foundations collectively across Canada and in British Columbia were called upon to help distribute those funds on behalf of the federal and provincial government.
Okay.
So we worked on that over the last number of years, and we basically have probably put out in Port Moody itself close to $300,000 or more into the nonprofit sector to help them sustain themselves through the COVID challenges, but also to build resilience so that they can actually carry on their work subsequent to COVID.
Right. And who are some of these community organizations locally here?
Port Moody Arts Centre would be an example. The Community Venture Society would be an example.
CVS.
Kinsight would be an example.
Okay.
Mossam Creek would be an example. All of those types of organizations would be trying to find ways in which they could sustain their operations. But equally, they want to continue that going forward as well.
So with regards to community impact, what do you think some of the biggest opportunities and challenges that are facing Port Moody right now?
Well, we've got a significant growth factor in Port Moody. So we've got a huge new population group coming in.
Yes.
We've got a change in demographic profile in the community too. So it changes the types of work that the nonprofit organizations undertake, because they've been dealing with a certain demographic and age factor. Now they're going to be dealing with a different demographic age factor. So what I see is the challenges for organizations like the Port Moody Arts Centre, the Heritage Society, is to build programming that basically is appropriate for the new community we're seeing evolve within Port Moody. And it is an evolving community. I moved to Port Moody in 1980. Okay, it was much smaller than what it is now. The mix-up, the makeup of the population was much different than what it is now. So we're now seeing a much younger population, seeing young families. Those types of changes change the type of work that those organizations have to basically focus on. And so the foundation, again, we monitor that, but what we're going to be dealing with is when the applicants come in looking for funding from us, they're coming in with their programs based on what they see happening in the community.
Right. What role does civic engagement and community input play in a foundation's work?
We're not advocates for specific causes. We support specific causes. So we do have a broad spectrum of work that we undertake. There are certain cases when we might sort of step up and say, this is an appropriate thing for organization to undertake, but that's not our role.
Right.
Our role is to basically build that capacity within our endowment portfolio by which we can support the organizations that are doing those frontline activities. Those frontline organizations are far better equipped to advocate for whatever their causes are, be it art, heritage, or healthcare.
Do you feel that people know, like, who the Port Moody Foundation is and how to sort of approach them? And I mean, the one thing that I know is that you put out community grants. You know, that's really all that I know, and that's why I wanted to sit down with you so you could sort of enlighten us all and tell us what it's all really about. So, do you feel that the community knows who you are and what you stand for?
We're probably the quiet partner within the community.
Okay, yeah.
So we do have 3 principles. We basically look for people to provide funding to us.
Yes.
We then grow those fundings through investment, and then we grant funding.
Right, okay.
So those are the 3 major steps. And so we are the silent organization within the community. It's very challenging to sort of get into the space of being a broader communication when you're basically also out there in the same type of world seeking funds to help things like the hospital or the hospice.
Right.
You know, a much more easier item to talk to people about than the foundation. But we are in the process of doing more communication. We've recently just rebuilt our website. We're doing some more work within the communication space, but it is something we continue to nurture all the time.
Very good. As someone who's deeply involved in the community, what's your vision for Port Moody's growth and development?
Well, that's a very interesting discussion as we go through growth and development right now.
Yes.
Well, as I said, I moved here in 1980, and so I've seen the community change a lot. What was Newport was a bush. What was Studerbrook was a bush. What was Killarney was a pipe mill.
Wow.
So all of that has changed now to be a very, very mixed community, with respect to housing, with respect to commercial development and all of that. And I see that continuing to evolve. Okay, and it's going to evolve within the context of our current requirements for housing and for industrial development. So where I see the biggest challenges is to have the community understand that, evolution is going to occur. What we are doing today in any type of changes or plans probably won't actually come into reality for another 10 or 15 years.
Right, it's true.
So I know that there was a lot of debate about things like Newport and Suderbrook. I know there's a lot of debate about Klahani, but now those people that are there, they would never sort of say that that was a bad thing to do. So it will evolve over time, and there'll be challenges and discussions about it. No question about it. And I think we will have healthy debate, which I think is really good to have in a community, to basically understand what's the best for the community for the long run.
Yeah, I know that council talks about these projects that 20 years ago were put into place, and no one ever has gone back and said, no, Klahani was a horrible idea, or Newport Village. I mean, it's thriving. Those communities are thriving. We need that type of residential landscape for a city that is growing. How do you think the city can balance development and maintain green spaces and heritage, and as well as community culture?
Well, a lot of it's based on basically personal understandings. So, the community, there's an ecosystem that's in the city. Okay, talks about art, talks about heritage. You never want to lose that. So as we go through development, we always have to basically put in place the fact that we want to incorporate those within the development context that we're looking at. And that's where I see a little bit of the missing conversation at this point in time. Is, how do we retain all of that? We've got wonderful ecological environs within Port Moody. We've got wonderful heritage in Port Moody. Some of the heritage of Port Moody is very much connected to Canada as a nation.
Right.
We've got great art, and we have to incorporate that into all of these new changes that we're going to be undertaking, because that's where you continue to have the community structure, the community heart, the community soul. I used to call Moody Centre, the old Moody Centre, the soul of Port Moody. The inlet is the heart, but the soul is really in the old part of Port Moody. And we want to make sure we retain that as we go through any type of changes.
I live in Moody Centre. I guess I'm in the soul. What steps can Port Moody take to support a more inclusive and accessible community with programming?
Well, as I mentioned earlier, so there's a fairly significant demographic change happening within the community. We've got a wonderful mix of cultural integration happening in the community. Any type of program that's undertaken, be it by the city itself, by community organizations, has to basically incorporate that within their scope of activity, to understand the subtleties of the different communities, groups, and to provide ways in which those groups can work work and play in an area in which there's no boundaries put in front of them.
How does the foundation decide which local projects or causes to support? Because I'm sure you get inundated with the grants. You have a time limit, and then I'm sure that you have a grant reviewer within your board or a committee of sorts. And then, how do you pick who needs the money the most?
Well, we go through a fairly rigorous program of looking at each one of the applications to see sort of what is the factor that they're looking for.
Right.
We also look at their own individual capabilities, because some of them have very significant capabilities on their own, and we may be a very small part of it. On the other hand, there may be another organization that doesn't have an awful lot of capabilities on their own, and we could be a significant part of that. So there is a lot of ranking and comparison that goes on, but we also look at how can we spread the grant program across the focus areas that we look at. So when we look at focus areas, we look at art, heritage, social betterment. We don't want to be singularly focused in one or the other. So we have to look at what's the real need the organization has. We don't fund ongoing operations. That's not the intent of a foundation.
Right, of course not.
So we look at what's the project, what's the new item that they're trying to do. How is that going to fit into the community?
And how many people is it going to also involve and affect?
Exactly.
Yeah.
You know, so and not just looking at the breadth of the people it's going to be involving. So, you know, does it involve a broad spectrum of the community in the program it's going to deliver? So all of that's taken into consideration. And yes, it can be a challenging discussion to say, well, we'd love to be able to do this one, but we may not have, and it's always, there's greater demand than there is supply. So we always have to go through that conscious discussion and say, how much can we actually give out? Because we know there's going to be probably somebody that we're not going to be able to support.
Right, exactly. So what impact has the foundation funded initiatives had on the city and its residents? Can you give me like a success story, if you will, like something that you did, fund, and then it came out to fruition and you thought, wow, this was a much better project than we had anticipated?
Well, I can go back to a circumstance that occurred a number of years ago, and it's a story we talk about all the time. And that was when the hatchery at Mossam Creek burnt down.
Oh my gosh, yes.
And at the time, the Mossam Creek organization said, well, we've lost everything. And literally they had lost everything. We stepped in within the period of less than a week to basically say, we will act as a recipient of funds, donations, to help build a hatchery. And so because they were not at the moment within certain rules, a charitable entity, we ended up as being their charitable entity of record.
Wow.
That was a significant step for us to say we could move that quickly to support the hatchery. And it ended up being very beneficial because they could take that forward for some of the other support that they got to help build what now is a wonderful facility.
Right, exactly.
We've also provided programming support for organizations that receive funding for certain programs they can only do during the day, but they can't do the programming for their same clients in the evening. So we'll support a program that they can do for their clients in the evening. And that would be like the Community Venture Society, where they're doing program, hopefully covering for their clients for all the day. We're helping support a program that's something for them in the evening.
That's great. How can local businesses and residents get more involved with the foundation and with the work that you're doing?
Well, I said give.
Yes, you did. Yes,
so the first one is give.
Yeah, I knew the answer because you gave it to me earlier. But yeah, I mean, local businesses, obviously you need to build your fund as well in order to give your fund, right? Yeah. So what would your call to action be then to local residences and businesses?
Leave a legacy. So that's the key thing. And a legacy can be a large legacy, it can be a small legacy. But basically, if you really have a connection with Port Moody as a city, a place that you were born and brought up in, a place you moved to, that you've had your family in, all of that, this is a way in which you can leave a legacy of what you have had the opportunity to experience in Port Moody. We've just recently had a wonderful program with West Group, who are building a new development within Port Moody. We worked with them in a partnership. We've had a wonderful donation come from them. So
amazing.
We've got business donations, we've got individual donations. All of them go into an endowment. And that endowment is never spent. The only thing we ever spend is the earnings of the endowment. The endowment is always held and invested for growth.
That's amazing. Are there any upcoming projects or initiatives that you're particularly excited about?
Well, we're just at the end of our receipt of grant applications for 2025. We've had the most applications than we've had ever. And so during the next 2 to 3 weeks, we'll be going through reviewing those to see which ones will be successful. And by the time we get to our AGM, which is in June, we'll be able to announce our next round of grant recipients.
Oh, that's amazing. And when do you announce the ones that have just come in? What's the timeline for that?
Well, we just closed the intake.
So in June, you're going to be announcing it?
In June, we'll announce the actual recipients. We closed the intake for new applications the end of February.
Right, okay. It takes a long time though, right? March, April, May, and then you're going to do it in June.
Well, we do it based on the timing of our annual general meeting. Now, some of the organizations, when they do apply, and if we make a decision favorable for them, they may have a more immediate need for the funding, so we'll release it early.
Okay.
But we won't really do a public announcement of it until we get to the AGM.
And what would your long-term hope for Port Moody be in terms of the civic development and community well-being?
I just see Port Moody growing as a wonderful community that basically has a great cross-cultural connection, great amenities that basically support the residents there, And for the foundation, I'll be a foundation that basically has a significant amount of capital wealth,
Yes.
in which we can actually provide the service support to those organizations that are providing the great work in our community.
And is there anything else that our viewers should know about the foundation itself that we haven't covered, Robert?
Go to the website, portmoodyfoundation.ca. Take a look there. You'll see some great success stories that we've done in the past. And there's also a donate button.
Okay, sounds great. One question that I wanted to ask you, just to go back to the number of grants. This is your highest, number of grants that you've received, you said, right?
Applications.
So, applications, thank you, applications. Why do you think that is? Like, what do you think the shift is? Let's say last year you received 50, and this year it's doubled, for example. What does that mean to you?
Two things. There's a lot of pressure on the nonprofit sector right now from a standpoint of their funding resources. So I think a lot of them are more active in actually seeking grant opportunities. So there's more work being done by those organizations to actually look for grant opportunities. I think the other part of it is that there's a greater opportunity now. There's been some relaxation in the federal tax laws that allow for organizations that are not charities to apply for grants to a foundation. There was a lot more restriction before. They've been relaxed a little bit, so I think we're seeing more of those types of organizations who are not charitable by themselves being able to make an application. So there's two or three things happening. There's pressure on the sector,
right?
But there's also some relaxation in the rules that allow for more to come in.
Exactly. Now, tell us what the website is again so our viewers can take a look. What is it?
PortMoodyFoundation.ca.
Okay, great. Today we're talking to Robert Simons, the president of the Port Moody Foundation. Go check them out, find out more, and check out their website below. I'm Cathy Cena with Catching Up with Cathy. Thanks so much for watching.